All right, thanks, Jen. Let's see, can you hear me? All right. Yeah, so yeah, I'm really excited to talk. I know I sort of didn't get a talk title in because I wasn't quite sure until really last week what I was going to talk about, but I figured I talk about the native bees, which are not quite what I started on completely, but really what I started my sort of professional research career in after I'd been here in Hawaii for a little while and started to notice them around just in my yard and found that nobody really knew anything about them. So I started working on them, and it's turned into this 30-year-long project, basically. So yeah, this is one of them. This is one that's actually found in the wet forest, Hylaeus pubescens. It's a really neat one. It's quite big for a Hawaiian species, and yeah, pretty striking. And this one actually is not yellow-faced, not in the males or the females, but I'll get to that later. So good. Okay. So so the stinging wasps, what are known as Achilles, that actually have a stinger that at least theoretically can give you a painful sting, are kind of poorly represented in Hawaii by native species. So there's only these 6 groups, and one of them is sort of unusual. It's that group of parasitoids in the top right, Sierola. And there's hundreds of species, probably about 500. That's the group I've been working on recently. But they're tiny. You're probably not going to notice them. The next biggest one is what are known as potter wasps, the Nisodinaris, and they're pretty diverse, but also another group that's understudied. Nobody knows really much about them. Nobody's looked at them for 120 years. And then the other 3 groups down there in the corner are much less diverse, only 10 to 20 species. And then the yellow-faced bees are sort of in the middle there. They've got about 64 species that we know of currently. Keep finding more, which is good. At the same time, there's some that haven't been seen in 100 years. So the fact that we're still finding more is sort of a good sign. It means that there's ones that have been hidden, and we do sometimes rediscover them as well. So there's still a possibility that those other ones could still be out there. And there is a real diversity in the color pattern. So the main way, the easiest way to tell them apart is by the facial pattern on the male. And this is why this whole group worldwide is known as yellow-faced bees, is because there's usually a yellow mark on the male, and usually in the female that's just completely black. But you can see the top right ones, Cocaensis and Mana. That's the male on the left and the female on the right. So sometimes the females do have yellow marks, although they're always much less than the males, and they do have them too. And then there's some, like that one, Tukumie in the bottom right, where the males too are all black. And some of them, also you can see that first segment of the antenna in that Tukumie is really swollen. That's also a male character. They have a gland in that antenna that secretes a pheromone. And that again is something that's variable. You can see that antennal segment across the different species is wider or narrower in different. And there's some that have actually white marks instead of yellow. So there's a real diversity in that way. And it is great that there's been kind of a resurgence of interest. When I started working on these back in 1998 or so, nobody had done anything on them since about 1920. Nobody really even collected them, and so I just wanted to sort of figure out what the species were, what their distribution was, and it's really been great that it's sort of inspired other people to go on and work on them as well, and a lot more interest. But one of the things is that this one species that lives by the coast has gotten a lot of attention, and is sort of the one that you see talked about a lot. And I do want to remind people that there's a lot more out there, and some of them are actually even rarer than that one. and to me more interesting. There's a really big diversity of them out there. And so one thing that's really unique about the Hawaiian yellow-faced bees is that some of them are cuckoo bees, also known as kleptoparasites. So this is something that's evolved repeatedly in bees. So it's not like totally unique in the world, but it's actually unique within this family, the Calididae. What they do is, instead of making their own nest, these species will enter the nest of another species, lay their egg there on the provisions, and then that egg will hatch, and the larva will either, usually in the more specialized species, it'll actually kill the host larva, or else, more typically, it'll just eat faster and eat up all the provisions and the pollen and nectar. And so it's sort of like a cuckoo bird that lays its egg in another bird's nest. But so this is one of the species, the one that's found on the Big Island here. And so there's actually 5 species of these here. They're all one group related to each other. But this is a totally separate origin of it, and it's the only ones in this family that have done that. And this is just to show the size range of them. So this is one of the smallest ones, Hylaeus mono, which is one from Oahu. It's a specialist on Iliahi. And then the bigger one is Hylaeus paradoxicus, which is one from here, actually in the dry forest. And unfortunately, I haven't seen that lately, so I hope it's still around somewhere. But it's a really neat one. It's got that sort of metallic red abdomen. It's really pretty. And then there's some that are just incredibly rare and we really know nothing about. So this is probably the sister species of that one, Paradoxicus. It's one that I discovered in a sense, in that I found it in the collection and I realized it was new, but somebody else collected it. But so this is to date still the only known specimen. It's really surprising. And I looked and looked and haven't found any more, so it's pretty likely this one is extinct. It was found at Kilauea, where a lot of the dry forest ones were previously found back in the early 1900s, and pretty much none of them are found there anymore. They've only recently been found around Pohakaloa and Pu'uvava, and so this one could maybe be still hanging out there, and I just didn't find it when I was collecting there 15 years ago, but who knows? And yeah, like I said, we are still finding more species. And one of the things I was really surprised at was a lot of the new species that I found in my work have been on Oahu, which is, both the most heavily collected island and the most degraded. So you wouldn't really expect to find a lot there. But those three, one of the top right, top left, and the bottom left, all three of those are new species that I found, and all from very few specimens. So that top right one actually is still only known from that one in the picture. It's still the only one known. And that one I didn't even notice. I only realized after I took the picture that it was new. I thought it was that previous one, Hylaeus mono. And it was very cold and raining, and so I sat down and noticed it resting on the leaf there and took a picture and said, this is a good opportunity, because usually they're very flighty. And I was looking at the picture on my camera and realized it has yellow mandibles, and there's no other Hawaiian species that have yellow mandibles. I said, oh gosh, this is another new species. So I didn't manage to collect it, fortunately, but that just shows the effect of just random chance on finding some of these. If they happen to scare it off or happen to not sit in that spot at that time, it would have still been undiscovered. And then that one on the bottom right, Hylaeus anomalus, is one that was formerly relatively common on Oahu, but it's been gone for close to 80 years. I think the last one had been found, or at least the last one I knew about, was collected in the 1940s or 50s, and I did later find one in a student collection that nobody had noticed from 1977, but that was the last actual one. And then this one turned up. And this was in the Waianaes as well, which it hadn't been previously known from. It was only known from the coal wasps. So again, just sort of a interesting recollection. So. And then this is the new one from Molokai that Jen was mentioning. And this was a really interesting, almost chance to find as well. So we were had spent 4 days up in the rainforest, and it was pouring rain the whole time. And then we came down and went to this dry forest spot, which didn't seem very good to me. It was sort of remnant dry forest. It was pretty weedy. It had a lot of native trees, but the understory was very weedy, except for this one native shrub, Kolomona. I don't know if you have it.
We have Kolomona.
That's great. I'll have to come and check it for flowers sometime.
Yeah.
This is actually the first time I'd ever seen Kolomona, and I found bees on it, and I collected a few and thought, I got one that I recognized and thought, this is okay, but it's not super interesting. And then I was looking closer and realized it was a male with black face, and there are no males with black faces known from Molokai. So that was the sign it was a new species. And actually, it turned out the other ones, I didn't sort of recognize it. Yeah. I didn't recognize it at the time, but the other two that I thought of as common actually hadn't been collected on Molokai in about 100 years either. So those were also really interesting finds. And I went back there, so this was last May, and then I went back there a couple weeks ago and found them all still there, which was very great to see. Found some more of this species. So. Still there, still mostly on the Kolomona, which is not great because there's not a lot of it. There's only about 2 or 3 plants. But hopefully they're also visiting other flowers there. There are other things. But it's interesting. And just in general, the native bees live in a really wide variety of habitats, really pretty much every habitat. They originally one of the early entomologists described them as almost the most ubiquitous of Hawaiian insects, and because they'll live from down at the coast, including like down at the coast here, but also these sort of windward rocky shores where you get Sesuvium, and what's the Hawaiian name? Sorry, blanking on the Hawaiian name for that.
Like the sea spray?
But with the purple flowers, akuli. Then you get sort of dry shrubland, like in the top right, where you get a lot of Hawaiʻi, pukiawe, sometimes ohia, and that they'll go all the way up to the subalpine area, like on Mauna Kea, Mauna up to like 10,000 feet in the dry forest. And they really like things like akoko, some unusual flowers, like that one there is at Puvava. And then even in the wettest wet forest, they don't really come out when it's wet or raining or even cloudy. So it's hard to see how they survive there, but sometimes you'll be out and the sun comes out and then they're there right on the flowers. So they can make it. The range has definitely contracted a lot, but they are still found in a lot of places pretty much most of the places where there's intact native habitat. This is just sort of a map I made. I made it a while ago, so it may not be still accurate because there's been some degradation since then, especially the spread of ants, which I'll get to a little later. But I am missing some areas like this. So the ants are an issue with this kind of forest where it's you have a nice native vegetation, but it's low elevation, and so that's also a real big limiting factor, especially on the coastal areas too. And one thing that I think gets underappreciated is just the scale of landscape transformation. So I don't have a thing from the Big Island, but this is just to show you Oahu, and I wish it was sort of colorized, but you can see, like, back in the late 1800s, things were so degraded from cattle and goats and things that these valleys that now you look at and they're really green and lush, they were just totally denuded, and this is all just bare dirt in those upper photos. And then you can see in the lower photos, it's completely grown on in with alien vegetation. So things have really transformed over the last couple hundred years, and it hasn't just been a sort of simple process of replacing the native vegetation with alien plants. It's been just sort of wiped clean in a lot of places. And so the ants are really the biggest limiting factor for the most part. So this is, I tried to do a reintroduction of some species down at Kuhunua Honanau, and there's one spot where there was no ants and a couple other spots where there were ants, and I tried to release them at all three sites to see sort of if they could survive with ants, and as it shows, they did not. Sort of as soon as they came out and landed on the ground, they got immediately attacked by big-headed ants. They can sort of tolerate low levels if they're really thinly spread, but when there's the usual real dense numbers of ants where you can actually see the nest on the ground, they'll just completely exclude them. And Argentine ants are a real big problem as well, and those can get up into the higher elevations. They're a big problem at PTA and at Hawaii volcanoes as well. And those are in some ways even worse, because besides just preying on the ants like this, they'll actually go into the flowers and take the nectar. And so you go up and by 7 o'clock in the morning, the flowers are just completely dry of nectar because the ants have taken it all, and there's just nothing for the bees to eat. And then in the dry forest in particular, the niothrips has been a real problem. So this is the thing that I think has changed the dry forest habitat the most in the last 20 or so years. And this is a really tiny insect. The thrips has these really unusual mouth parts. They're sort of piercing, sucking, where they puncture an individual cell and then suck out the contents. And this one that attacks the nio, it causes this leaf galling and deformation. And it seems in wet places they can survive that. It's related to how much water they can get. But in dry forests like this, it really hits them hard. And that bottom one is the Kipuka and PTA Whakaloa that was almost complete, almost solid nio, and it's just now almost completely dead. Those ones actually, you probably can't see it, but there's like a few green trees still in there, and those are like the few trees that are not nio. So all the nio have died. And even when it doesn't kill the plant, they generally stop flowering, which obviously is not good for the bees. And my sort of hypothesis is that the nio is it's kind of the most drought tolerant plant in there, and it's one that often flowers in the summer. And so I suspect that it's probably one of the things that help the bees survive through the summer in the driest periods, because in those places where there was a lot of nio, especially where it was sort of mixed with other things, the bee diversity has really declined a lot, and those are the places that used to be among the most diverse. And then there are alien bees. Most of them are different types of bees. There's small carpenter bees, there's sweat bees, but then there are a few introduced Hylaeus. So this one here is a Hylaeus strenuus, which is actually pretty interesting in its own because it's originally from India and almost nothing was known about it. This was itself basically described from a single specimen, which was misidentified as a female when it was actually a male. and then nothing else was heard about it since then. It's described in 1912 or something, and then it showed up here. And so one of the experts in the group said, "Oh, this is great! And now we have actual specimens, so we can redescribe it and work on it." But obviously, it's not great that it's here because it's found mostly in the coastal areas. It does sometimes spread into the dry forest, so you may see it up here. I don't think it's been found on Big Island yet, but it's been found on. It got into Oahu originally, and then it's been found on Kauai. And I'm sure it'll get here eventually. It really may not be able to tell, but this is on a willy-willy tree, and it really seems to like willy-willy flowers, which is very strange because that's a very obvious bird-pollinated plant. So get to that a little later, but like bird-pollinated plants tend to have like red flowers and a lot of really dilute nectar, and that's what willy-willy is. And but these guys, they actually spread, found all of the erythrina, even like the plant cultivated, coral tree and those kind of things. They found all of the erythrina on Oahu before they spread sort of to the coastal areas where you might expect to find them, which is very strange. So they have some kind of preference for that. And this one here is concentrating the nectar, which, they all do, all the Hylaeus do. But they probably have to do that extra for the willy-willy nectar, which is really interesting. So you don't have to pay attention to the names here, but this is a table I made up of sort of the different conservation rankings. And this is originally from 2007. I've modified it a little bit with the new species and changed some things, but probably if you applied things a little more strictly, things would be worse. But so pretty much only those ones in the first column are species that could be considered reasonably secure in a conservation sense, and pretty much all of the rest are threatened or endangered in some way. So the ones in column 2, the ones that are rarely collected but in widespread habitat, those may be okay, at least some of them. A lot of those are the wet forest species, and it's really difficult to collect in those areas. You have to find, the trees are really tall. They always tend to be around the tops of the trees, which makes them really difficult to collect. So you have to find sort of an opening or a road where you get the flowers. You have to be at the right time when flowers are going off, and then it has to be sunny, so getting all of those to converge is pretty tough. So a lot of those are probably okay, but like Mimicus is one from Oahu, one of the new species that I discovered back in 2000, and I actually haven't been able to find it recently, so something may have happened with that. And then, all the other ones, the ones where they disappeared from, are very rare on some islands, or they're only found in really threatened habitat like dry forests. All of those are really pretty endangered. So there are, the ones in red are the species that are federally listed as endangered. So those are the ones that are actually legally protected, but you can see that's just a small fraction of the ones that are actually threatened by extinction. And those ones on the far right, number 6, are the ones that haven't been seen in 100 years or so and are potentially extinct. And this is just to show the distribution of those listed endangered species. So we only have the one on Big Island, Hylaeus anthracynus, that's primarily found at the coast. There was that one collection up at Puhakaloa, but that may be sort of an errant individual. They are sometimes found in dry forests like this. They do come up. They've been found at like 2,000 feet on Maui, but they're mainly found at the coast. And they can be found in some unusual places. So this is, I think it's the Hilton. Yeah. So the tree heliotrope there is, that's actually one of their favorite flowers. It's pretty much the only non-native plant that they visit, at least on a regular basis. But these coastal species really love it. And And then that little strip right along the shoreline in front of those hotels down there, you can find the native bees, sometimes in really big numbers. You won't find them right on the beaches, and you don't find them back in the landscaping. I don't know, they might be using pesticides in there, but you go right down on sort of the beach walk, and you'll find them.
Cool.
And yeah, so these are sort of typical bee flowers. So this is what, if you just saw this, you would think this is what bees would visit. They're yellow, kind of wide open petals. Usually the stamens are really obvious. And so really only that one on the bottom right is one that the native bees visit. For some reason, they don't really favor these typical bee flowers. And actually, even that one I think is pretty uncommon. That's the tribulus, the caltrop. And there's also a lot of native plants that have just sort of very tiny, plain flowers that aren't very favored as well. These are green and conspicuous, and we really don't know what pollinates them. Probably maybe beetles or flies. So these are Ue, Kolea. That might be Carnival, Kava'u. Not sure what that other one is. But yeah, so these also aren't visited much by the Hylaeus. But and a lot of our rare plants also are typically not. A lot of these are bird pollinated, so they'll be red and kind of long and tubular. And so those are also, again, not the ones that the Hylaeus visit. But what they do really like are mostly things like this. So they like the Nio flowers. And you can see those are kind of similar to some of those other flowers, but they're different. They are very fragrant, which is a big difference. That's another sign of a bee flower, is if it has a really strong smell. So Nio and Iliahi, they have a really nice scent. That's a good sign of a bee flower. Ilima is one that they like, but there's a couple of species that are really adapted to it. The Ilima pollen is really big, so it's they need to be bigger. The actual bee needs to be bigger to be able to eat it, because they actually swallow the pollen. But then Hawaiʻi is not one that you would think any bee would visit. That's the male flower there, and it's just sort of bare stamens. It has no nectar, no petals, no smell, but it's one of their favorite pollen plants. They really love it. So, yeah. And then Pukeawe is a really popular one as well. They like both the nectar and the pollen from it, even though it's a teeny tiny flower. It's small enough they can get their mouth parts in and get the nectar and pollen out. And I guess you just visit enough of them, and that gives you good stuff. And then in the wet forest, one they really like is Alapa. And this again is sort of what makes that different from the Kolea flower exactly. I don't know. It's very small. It's green. But this is after Ohia, this is the main one that they get pollen from in the wet forest. This is another thing that makes collecting in the wet forest difficult, because this is the easiest one to get them off of, but it's also very difficult to tell from the ground if they're flowering or if they're in bud, or if the flowers have dropped off and it's just starting to fruit, because it's just a little green dot.
Be a good tree climber?
Yep. Yeah, and then of course Ohia is the big one that's popular in every habitat that it occurs. But again, it's a red flower. They will visit for nectar. They'll also climb up to the ends to collect the pollen. And some people have suggested actually that the yellow varieties of Ohia are an adaptation to bee pollination, except that I've never seen a bee visit a yellow Ohia. That you would think they would at least sometimes do it, because they like Ohia in general. But I've looked a lot on yellow Ohia trees, and I've never seen them visit. And again, another strange flower that they like is a cocoa. So this is the tree form that we have here on the Leeward Big Island, Sierola, and it doesn't even look like a flower. This is actually, I think, 6 different flowers in one little cup. So each of those sort of little stamens there is a separate male flower, and then the thing sticking out is a separate female flower. So it's a very strange composite thing, but they really like it. It has a smell, but it's a very kind of an unpleasant smell if you've ever smelled it. But they really like it. This is one that I've gotten 5 species of bees at a time. Oh yeah, and then as I mentioned, tree heliotrope, which is something you might expect. It's got big clusters of flowers. They have pollen and nectar, but it's also an alien. And they, aside from this, they very rarely visit alien plants. Occasionally, especially when the natives have stopped flowering or something, but it's usually sort of random, just whatever is out there, and they clearly really favor this, even though they also almost never visit, or actually never that I've seen, visit the native heliotropes, the little herbaceous ones. So again, go figure. And they'll also visit some really sort of unusual flowers. So this is Pahininu, Astelia. It's a wet forest plant. If you walked around in like Oahu or that kind of place in the saddle, off the saddle, you'll see it's got silvery leaves and these big clusters of flowers, and they'll collect pollen from that first. And one thing that I think it sort of gets how do I put it? Gets overlooked in the discussion of bees and pollination is a lot of pollinating, or pollinating is not the same as visiting flowers. And so the females mainly visit flowers, and they're collecting nectar to bring back to their nest to provision for their larvae. But they tend to do a pretty good job of cleaning themselves off, and they're actually going and taking the pollen. A lot of the pollination may actually be done by like males. So this is a male, and you can see it's covered in pollen, and it's really not paying attention to what is happening to that pollen. So there can be different kinds of things, and a lot of times, when the females are doing that pollen collection, they're going straight for the stamens and not touching the pistils, so the pollen isn't actually getting to the flowers. But so it depends a lot on. They may actually be pollinating flowers that they're visiting only for nectar, and not the ones that they're visiting for pollen. And this is just to show how this group is unique. So this is a sort of a typical bee. This is a sweat bee from the mainland. And you can see it's got that big brush of hairs on the leg that is to hold the pollen, and that's how it brings pollen back to the nest. This is a yellow-faced bee, and you can see this is the female, so only the females have those hairs, but this is a female of the yellow-faced bee, and it doesn't have any of those hairs at all. And so what they do instead is they swallow all of the pollen. They just ingest it along with the nectar, and then when they get back into the nest, they regurgitate it. And so that's a pretty different method of transport, and they do use a much higher percentage of nectar relative to pollen in their provisions for the young, which is probably related to that. So that the provisions are very soupy instead of being sort of a loaf of pollen that's just slightly damp with nectar. And they actually, a really neat thing, this is getting off a little bit, but it's really cool that it's been discovered, is the provisions are actually very highly fermented. So they're not just eating the sugar of the nectar, they're actually allowing yeast to get in and ferment it, and then they're essentially consuming the yeast as another protein source. And so that's a really neat discovery. And yellow-faced bees are sort of essentially the highest on the trophic level, of the ones, and they're consuming the highest proportion of yeast relative to other bees. And so, this is the some of the different types of pollen. So, top right there is ohia, and you can see, and these are all at the same scale. So ohia is quite small. It's kind of triangular. I think, actually, I forget which is. Sorry, I forgot to change the color on this. This used to have a dark background, so it has white print. So the top is Naupaka, top left, and then the bottom left is Hawaiʻi, and then the bottom right is Ilima. And so you can see Ilima is much bigger than any of the others. It'd be like, so for a typical bee, swallowing an Ilima pollen would be kind of like swallowing a spiky golf ball. And so that's why I think I might have a picture of this. Oh, no, sorry, this is the pollen. So, the ones that use Ilima are about twice as long, which means they're about twice as wide, I think, as well, and so much bigger in volume, and they have a much bigger mouth, obviously, so they can swallow that giant pollen without any problem. They're not, or at least most of them are not pollen specialists. So this one, Hylaeus flavipes, this is I was going to say it's a coastal species, but it's actually not. It's probably actually 3 cryptic species. So it turns out the population down at the coast at South Point, and the montane ones that are found at Mauna Kea, and the ones that are found on Maui and Lanai are equally genetically distant from each other and very different from each other. So the mountain and the coastal ones here are potentially different species. But these two are together are the same, so that doesn't matter. But you can see that at the 3 different sites where it's found, they use completely different pollen types. And at South Point, they'll use actually quite a huge variety, including some that I couldn't even find, and a bunch of alien ones as well. And then at the other 2 sites, it's almost exclusively natives, even though there are aliens present. And this is just showing some of the proportions of the different plants that they use pollen from. So it's mainly Pukeave and Hawaiʻi in sort of dry shrubland type sites. At the coast, they use a lot of, if it's present, they'll use Nio. They like that tree heliotrope as well. And Paluo Hi'iaka is another one. Naupaka is an interesting one because it's 10% is fairly high, but it's pretty low compared to how much is there, and it seems like they can't survive on just Naupaka alone. So, a lot of places that's sort of the only real coastal vegetation, and if that's all there is, they can't really live there. So I think they'll visit as a nectar plant mainly, but not so much for pollen. And the wet forest is basically ohia and uapa, and everything else is minor. So that's all I have on the bees. So I can take any questions you have.
Except for the kleptoparasitic bees, what are the nest types of general Hylaeus?
Yeah. So So the question is, what are the nest types like? So not many of them are known, but based on the ones that are known, and sort of extrapolating to their habitats. It seems like there's 2 groups. One that are primarily in wetter areas that nest in twigs, and then most of the ones that live in drier areas that will nest in the ground. So if you find like an ash pocket or something, you can often find the holes in the ground. You can sometimes see the males cruising over looking for females. And you can find nesting sites like that, like sort of on dirt roads and things like that. I haven't had much luck finding the nest in the twigs. Some of my colleagues.
Do the ground-dwelling nesters, do they do the same thing of making sort of a curve in the chimney?
No, they don't have a chimney. They just dig straight into the ground. It's pretty simple, and that's also pretty unusual for Hylaeus. Most of the ones around the world nest in twigs or in wood, and they don't excavate really in the wood like carpenter bees do. They'll be in old bee nests of other species or beetle holes or that kind of thing. And there are some that actually will use rocks as well, and I think that's sort of a specialization. So there's definitely one here that seems to nest mainly in lava rock. So I found it. I don't know if any of you have been to the old Pulu factory out on the Napao Trail. But it's a big lava rock structure, and this one species was nesting all in it. And you pretty much only find that on new lava flows. And actually, the new one from Molokai seems to be the closest relative of that one. And that area where it was found is sort of this real rocky, talus-y area. So it may be more specialized to that sort of nesting type rather than the plants there. Because most of Molokai is really heavy red dirt. That's quite different.
So what does a typical day in your world of investigating all this stuff look like?
It depends. Oh, it is. What does my typical day look like? A typical day right now is spent with the microscope, because that's what a lot of time ends up being taken. So right now I mostly do real general surveys. So we're going out to sites that really have never had like an insect inventory and trying to see what's there, especially looking for rare species or things that might be endangered, but really just looking for anything and trying to look at the whole insect community and see what's there. And so, you can take a net and sweep around, beat the branches, see what comes off of them, and then set up traps. And so you spend all day doing that, and then you have a whole bunch of specimens that you then have to take and identify. And usually the identification takes 4 or 5 days for every day of collecting.
For the kleptoparasites, are they species specific as to their hosts? And then how taxonomically broad? That is, do they go outside the family? Do they go outside the order?
So the question was, do the kleptoparasites, are they host specific, or do they attack other things, or what's their host range? So they don't attack anything other than the native Hylaeus, as far as we can tell. It's been pretty recent that the other ones have arrived here. So although it's possible, they don't actually overlap yet. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe they'll go after the Hylaeus strenuus. They're not species. They're not host species specific. So it's been noted before, from when they were more common, that you would see really large individuals that came out of the nests of the larger host species, and smaller ones that came out of the smaller species.
So thank you for coming here. It's been really interesting. But I have never heard the term before, yellow-faced bee.
Yeah.
Are we likely to see such bees just in our yard and around and whatever?
Probably not in your yard, unfortunately. There's all these bee guides on the mainland, and people are always trying to do one here, and it's unfortunately pretty rare that you're going to see one in your yard unless you're in like upcountry Maui or Volcano. It's possible, actually, maybe here they could be. It depends. I don't know.
Come back, bring your net.
Yeah, I don't know what the ant situation is here. But if you have native plants in your yard, it's possible. And if they're here in the preserve, then it's possible they could be in your yard here, or if you live down at the coast there. Aside from sort of those few places, there's not many places they would live, around where people live, and there's not many things you could do to attract them. It's not like it's a matter of planting the right plants. So it's unfortunate.
Are there areas that are managing ants specifically for?
Not specifically for bees. There are some in general where we've done some ant control. I don't actually, Hawaiʻi may be doing some. And yeah, I don't know of anywhere else. It's pretty difficult, is the problem, especially for the Argentine ants, because those are the main ones that are targeted at the higher elevations. And the group that the Argentine ants and yellow crazy ants belong to are a lot more difficult to control than big-headed ants and the little fire ants. So and sometimes what you can do is eliminate the big-headed ants, and then the yellow crazy ants move in. And those are a lot worse, actually. So,
I'm wondering why. Can you explain what is it about the biology that makes them so hard to control?
it's what they're attracted to. So the big-headed ants, they're different subfamilies, and the big-headed ants and little fire ants, they're attracted to oil-based baits. So it's something you can really easily spread around. So like in the little granules, like the amber baits. So you can just disperse that, and it's something that other things aren't attracted to as well. So you can spread that bait around, and it will control them really easily, and also not affect much else. Whereas the other ants, that other subfamily, they are mostly attracted to sugar-based baits, and it's first of all a lot more difficult. You have to have like a liquid bait. And then that's also going to attract a lot of other things, a lot of other insects, other mammals. So, yeah, it makes it a lot more difficult.
When are Hylaeus most active?
So the question is, when are they most active? They're annoyingly inactive. They tend to be active mostly during the middle of the day. So at sort of mid to upper elevations, usually around 10 to 2. They'll usually start coming out earlier than that, and sort of where it's hot, like in the lowlands here, from here down to the coast, they'll like start coming out around 8 or so, and be more active, like more from 9 to 1. But yeah, compared to honeybees that are active from practically dusk till dawn, they have a pretty narrow window, and yeah, even when the sun goes behind a cloud, they'll often just disappear.
In this area, do you have any suggestions or any for what kind of plants that might be added around here to help the yellow-faced bees? Hawaiʻi,
Ojai. I guess Nio is kind of out of the question. That would be unfortunately the best one and easiest. What else? Ukiawe. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not like the nicest, sort of specimen plants.
Yes, they are.
I like them.
Look behind you. That's all.
I like them.
A Crips infested Nile, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
They're not such a great one.
Ojai is a good one, actually. I don't know how available that is since it's endangered, but they seem to like that a lot. Yeah. What else? Yeah, that's for sure.
Is there a sense of when the Hylaeus arrived in Hawaii, or when that radiation took place with all the species?
Yeah, so that was what I did my PhD on, or part of it, and seems to have been surprisingly recent. So probably within the last 1,000,000 years or so, and so this seems to be a really almost explosive radiation, which is really interesting.
I'll go for that.
Yeah.
So which one would be the founding species?
It's hard to say. The sort of well, a group of the coastal ones are. Or the question is which one would be sort of the founding species. A group of the coastal ones are sort of seem to be sort of the basal group, which makes sense that might be the first place they would get here. But it's not clear. It's hard to tell if that's still sort of what the first one might have looked like. Yeah, it's hard to tell. They're related to a group from East Asia and Japan that has a lot of undescribed species. So it's hard to know exactly which one of those it's most closely related to. But it is actually they look most similar to some of the dry shrubland species that just have a sort of triangular mark on the face.
Compared to an arbitrary site on the mainland, abundance and diversity on Hawaii, is it high or low?
It's very low.
Very low.
So
I mean, there's a lot of species listed there, but
there's a lot of species, but the most you would find in any one place is about 10 or 11, and that would be extraordinary. And also that would probably be not found anymore, unfortunately. And abundance now especially seems to be very low, at least in terms of how you collect them. They do tend to hang around the tops of trees, which makes it difficult. But just even accounting for when you can see them, like you often just sit there for 5 minutes, holding your net if you're trying to collect. Sit there for 5 minutes and one bee will come to make a circle around the tree and then leave. And if you don't take a swing at it right then, it's gone. You gotta wait another 5 minutes. Yeah.
You're very patient, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of patience. So this is actually, you're asking what a typical day is like. That's why in my work now, I'm not really doing a lot of work on the bees, because if you're looking for them, that basically takes up all your time. You have to keep moving, looking for a plant that's flowering, that's in a position where you can actually swing a net at it, and then be at the right time when it's sunny, and then have the bees actually be there. So you have to wait there for them, decide if there's none there, are you going to keep waiting there or go look at another place where maybe there's bees?
So what else do you do?
Well, I still do the bees occasionally. I do some of it. I do some stuff with aliens. I actually, if we're close to the end, I have a question for you. Do any of you ever notice leaf galls on the eucalyptus trees? Like little bumps, swellings?
Yeah.
You do? Okay, that's interesting. We're on the ones up on Waikoloa Road?
That's right.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen them all over.
Okay. So that's a group I've been getting into. So that family Eulophidae, it's the same family that the woolly gall wasp is in, and also the potential new biocontrol that might be released is in. And sweeping the lemon gum on Oahu, I found like 10 new introductions that nobody had known about. And one of them is this sort of notorious invasive gall wasp that's been causing huge problems, where eucalyptus is a big timber tree. But we don't have the species on Oahu that it's favored, which is the one here that's planted up the road. So it's kind of strange, and I find it very rarely. But yeah, that's interesting if you're seeing it around here.
I'll try to pay better attention.
Okay. Yeah, be interested. Send me pictures.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you collect these with a net, then do you aspirate them out of the net?
Well, it depends. If they're potentially ones that are rare or just in general, I don't currently collect very many, just because I've been collecting them, although unfortunately I've lost a lot of the ones that I collected early on, which is very unfortunate because I may not be able to get some of those anymore. But yeah, if I do collect them, I usually collect them into alcohol, because that allows you to do DNA on them later. But then if I'm not, if I don't have a specific reason to collect them, I'll usually collect them alive into a vial, and you can use a hand lens and look at them closely to look at try and identify them based on the color patterns and the hairs and things like that. And that way, if you get something that's really interesting, you can keep like that one and then let the other ones go.
Do you have a favorite Hylaeus species?
And people are always asking me that, and it's like asking your favorite child. You should know that.
But you have one, right?
Do I? I don't know if I do actually.
Should I go back to
There's
this
a bunch of candidates. That's only a handful.
Are any of them front runners?
Maybe.
No. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I like them.
Is the color pattern and is that sufficient to identify it to species?
It depends. So there's some. I mean, you might have a hard time telling between. Well, actually, you wouldn't have a hard time telling between Mana and Cocaines because they're on different islands. But if you're more familiar with it, it might be. There is another one that looks very similar to Mana that's also on Oahu called Specularis. There's actually I didn't even include it in this slide, but there's a big group in the dry shrubland that have just sort of a triangular face mark, and they're pretty similar. But if you also look at the length of the hairs on the back of the thorax and the length of the space beneath the foot of the eye, that combination will tell you what species it is.
So, especially when it comes to honeybees, we see that they're intelligent and sociable. Do we see similar behaviors among native Hawaiian bees?
They're not really sociable. They do have, or they're not social at all in the sort of scientific sense. They each one makes its own nest and takes care of its own larvae, and that's it, as far as we know. They do form nesting aggregations, and it's not clear what the basis of that is. And sometimes it's just where there's a favorable spot, but there's some for Hylaeus the simulans, which is one of the listed species, the one that feeds on the Lima. You just have big areas where there's hundreds and hundreds of nests, and they're all together, and it's not clear why they're all nesting there. It doesn't seem to be different from other places where there's no nests, so they may just be queuing in on things that we don't know. So, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's hard to ask this question on Hawaii, but do they overwinter?
So they don't overwinter as such, but that is something that I've wondered about, is how they survive periods when there's no flowers, especially the ones that live in dry places where it gets really dry. So I suspect they have some kind of, maybe not hibernation technically, but they'll just sort of find a spot, under a rock and just sit there and just be low energy and maybe come out every few weeks or few months and sort of see what things are like and then go back down there because
and they live for only a year.
You don't know how long they live. They probably don't live for more than a year. If they live for up to a year, that would be a sign that I'm right about that they estimate in some way. There are some people who think that they have pretty short lifespans and they just die off, and there's just a small population that, lives off of the alien plants or whatever during the dry season. But
for honeybees, they tend to starve as soon as their wings fray.
Mm.
Would you mind sharing sharing your personal experience with how you became like the bug guy?
For back you want me to go.
Start in the blue if you can.
Yeah, that's pretty much almost as far as I'll have to go. No, I've been interested in insects since I was about 8. That's when I sort of decided to be an entomologist, and I, threw quite a few bugs when I was a kid. Then when I was in college, I was in my senior year and suddenly realized I was going to graduate in a few months and didn't have a job and needed one. And a friend of mine had done an internship at the Bushy Museum and knew someone there. And I was interested in yellow jackets because that was the only thing at the time on the mainland that could actually identify its species because I had found the scientific publication on them. And he mentioned, that they had a problem with the invasive yellow jackets here. And so, I wrote to the Fish Museum, Frank Howarth, and he said, no, they aren't hiring anyone, which they still aren't 30 years later. But he forwarded my letter to someone at Hawaiʻi Volcanoes who was working on yellow jackets, and he was so happy to find somebody who was willing to work with yellow jackets that hired me without any experience. And then I just started doing whatever bug things there were to do. And that's a good way to get, general experience and sort of figure out what exactly, even if you know in general you want to become an entomologist, it's a good way to figure out exactly what you want to do. And it's a good thing I spent 4 years there because I actually applied to grad school initially after 2 years. And if I'd gone then, I would have gone into the wrong subfields.
I have a question. Say something about Nile. And is it because this is not the right climate for it, or you can't?
No, this is the perfect climate for it.
But you said you couldn't grow it here or something?
No, because of the threats.
And is there any solution to that?
Not that we've been able to find.
So it's a dwindling species that will disappear.
It survives pretty well in the wet forest. So the species itself is not going to go extinct, but it's been hit really hard in the dry forest, which is where its primary thing. Like, people don't even think of it as living in wet forest, but you do see it if you know where to look. But it's really unfortunate, but it's really altered the whole ecosystem, isn't it?
How are color bugs doing?
Not well. You see them every once in a while, but
There used to be a thriving colony right outside the elementary school.
They sort of come in bursts. It's funny. People always use like the mongoose as an example of bad biocontrol, but actually the koa bug and the bug that killed it off is a much better one, since that happened later when they really should have known better. So that was. They used to be pretty common and abundant, like even in Honolulu, but also obviously on Big Island and all the other islands. And there's a parasitic fly that killed it off. It attacks the southern green stink bug, and they'll get sort of good colonies sometimes for a little while, and then the flies find them and nail them back.
So you mentioned that the Erythrina gall wasp, there's another biocontrol coming?
Yeah, so the current wasp is good enough for to keep the gall wasp down so that the trees are healthy, but they don't live very long, and so the parasites don't live very long, and so when it's been over the summer and the leaves have dropped, and then they come back out, and then especially when the flowers come out, they'll attack the flowers as well, and that parasite isn't really there to be on the flowers And then again, when the leaves come out with a new flush, it takes them a while to build up. And so this second one is much longer lived, and it will be able to track the gall wasp a lot better, and hopefully allow them to flower better and produce more seeds.
It's also a wasp.
Yeah.
Any updates on when that's going to get released? Or
I haven't heard.
We're excited for it.
Yeah.
That's been the info from Sierola for many years. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate that one of these screw-ups earlier have led to such stringent requirements on biocontrol that it now takes years and years and years to get it on. It's in some ways gone a little too far in the other direction.
Thank you so much. I just learned so much.